So this is Chapter 5, which is all about tissues, and in this lecture we will be introducing tissues and looking at the characteristics and functions of epithelial tissues. So here we go. So in the body there are trillions and trillions of cells. The estimates are somewhere north of 75 trillion cells in the body. But if we were to pick apart all those cells and spend some time tossing them into different buckets based on their appearance and their function, we would see that there are about 260 different kinds of cells or types of cells in the body. And we could further clump together all these 260 buckets that we have into about 25 different tissue types. And so that's our job in this chapter, is to understand what's going on with each of those different tissue types. So what is a tissue? Well, it's either a layer, a sheet of cells, or a cluster, a clump, a wad of cells that are closely associated. They're attached to each other, and they have within them similar structures, and they work together to perform a common function. So these are cells that are like each other and that do a lot of the same work. And if you study tissues, then you're a histologist doing histology, which is that studying of tissues. So again, 25 different kinds of tissues found in the human body. But if we were to even further look for similarities among those 25 types, we could finally get them grouped into 4 different primary tissue types. There's the epithelial tissues. These are the tissues that cover the surfaces of the body and line the interiors of any hollow organs and lay across or cover the surfaces of organs that are found in the body. So epithelial tissues are the covering tissues. They're the connective tissues. I think of this as sort of the stuffing of the body. This is the stuff that keeps us kind of plumped up, if you will. And they're the tissues that bind one to another tissue type to a third tissue type. So they're the binding. They're the glue isn't the right word, but they're the attaching tissues, hence the term connective. There's the muscle tissues, those tissues that are responsible for making movement, for contracting, for getting smaller and then relaxing and lengthening again. And then finally there are the nervous tissues, and these are the ones that are responsible for communicating from one portion of the body to another. So epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue are the 4 primary tissue types. And again, there are 25 different give or take, 25 tissue types in the body total. So that means that there must be multiples of epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissues. All right. So I mentioned that tissues are held in close association to each other, and there are 3 different ways that they can be held together. First, there are these glycoproteins. Oops, check one. There we go. There are glycoproteins. Glyco meaning sugars. Proteins, of course, meaning proteins. Duh. And they can be adhesive. These glycoproteins are adhesive, and so they act like a glue that can hold the membranes of 2 different cells together. So we have this glue, the adhesive glycoproteins. Second, the plasma membrane themselves, the cell membranes of cells, may have these wiggles in them that hold the 2 cells together. So the folding of the cell membrane will hold the 2 pieces or 2 cells together, sort of like puzzle pieces are held together in a puzzle. And then the third way that we can hold two cells in close association with each other is to have specialized proteins that act as intercellular, or between, inter means between, cellular junctions that will hold together the cell membranes of adjacent cells. And there are three types of these intercellular junctions: tight junctions, desmosomes, and gap junctions. And I've got them, pictures of them here. These are the tight junctions, these are desmosomes, and these are the gap junctions. So let's look at each one of those kinds of intercellular junctions a little more closely to see how they operate. So the first kind of intercellular junction would be the tight junctions, and they form because there are proteins that are found there. They are the transmembrane type of proteins that are found in the cell wall, cell membrane. So if this is the lipid bilayer, here's the transmembrane proteins, and if we have another cell membrane right nearby, these transmembrane proteins will attach to each other. And when they attach like that, they will hold the cells very tightly, very close to each other. And we find them in belts. So this would be a belt of tight junctions here. And they will they hold the membrane together so tightly here that water molecules and other molecules cannot pass between the cell membrane at this point. It blocks any molecule from passing between the cell membranes, and it then creates this waterproof seal between the two cells. So one example of a location where we have tight junctions like this is between the cells of the epithelium that lines the digestive tract. And because these tight junctions are there, none of the digestive enzymes or the acids that are produced in the stomach can leak through the cell layers and cause damage to the layers of cells outside, like to the muscle that is just outside of that epithelial layer that lines the interior of the stomach. Skin cells are also, the epidermal cells, are also held together with tight junctions, and that makes our skin mostly waterproof. Second kind is called a desmosome. Desmosomes, I'm looking again at this silly cell, so this is once more a generalized cell. You're not going to find tight junctions, desmosomes, and gap junctions all on the same cell like this. So, but a desmosome, it prevents the cells from being pulled apart from each other, but it doesn't allow the cell membranes to touch. And so with a desmosome, you will see materials being able to move between the two cells. So molecules can pass between those two cells. And the intercellular, the desmosome here, that intercellular junction, is composed of filaments that extend from proteins found. So here's a protein found on the inside of one cell, protein found on the inside of the other cell. These protein filaments reach in and interconnect with the cytoskeleton of the cell that we're talking about. And then these are the connecting proteins that reach out, and if you look close there, you'll see they're almost like fingers of two hands interlaced with each other, and it forms this very strong connection between the cells. But the connection can be twisted, it can be compressed, it can be stretched apart. And so we find desmosomes in places where the skin, where the cells are going to be subject to a lot of mechanical stresses, a lot of pushing and pulling and stretching. And so the skin has not just tight junctions, but also desmosomes that allow for the cells to be stretched some. the cervix of the uterus, which also has to do a lot of stretching if we think about, giving birth. And so desmosomes there allow the cervix to really stretch. Last of all are the gap junctions. So these are connections or intercellular junctions that hold the membranes close to each other, but again, they're not tight junctions, they're not sealing. But the thing that is characteristic to them is that when these transmembrane proteins connect to each other, they form a channel between two cells. And so this allows the cells to be in very close communication with each other. Ions, sugars, and other small molecules can pass from one cell, the interior of one cell, to the interior of the other. So anywhere we need cells to be in close communication, we'll find these gap junctions. For instance, in the heart, the communication is the signal for a heart muscle cell to contract is passed very rapidly from one heart muscle to the next, from one heart muscle cell to the next heart muscle cell. And this allows for very rapid communication and synchronization, that is, beating, contraction together, so contracting at the same time. That's what I mean by synchronization of all of these muscle cell contractions. And so that allows the heartbeat to be very organized, very synchronized. Okay, so 3 different kinds of intercellular junctions that we associate with cells and with tissues. So I have mentioned the 4 tissue types and their function in protection, support, movement, and control of the body. So let's take a look at that first tissue type and some of the characteristics that are associated with epithelia. An epithelium is a layer of tissue. So here, epithelia are sheets of tissue that cover or line all the body surfaces, both the interior surfaces and the exterior surfaces. They cover up the organs, so they're found as sheets that are the outermost layer of the organs of the body. They line the body cavities and line any hollow organs of the body. So among the epithelia are the skin, the lining of the digestive, respiratory, urinary, and genital or reproductive tracts. They line all of the blood vessels and all the chambers of the heart. And they cover the walls or organs of the ventral body cavities. So we see epithelial tissues scattered throughout the body, and they're always at a surface somewhere. But there's a second kind of epithelium, and we refer to that as glandular epithelium. So this is the epithelium that is associated with and forms the glands of the body. And these epithelial cells are responsible for secreting materials, the glandular materials. So mucous glands, we think about mucous glands in the nasal passages, in the digestive passages, the serous glands that we've already talked about in previous chapters that secrete the serous fluid that lubricates the movement of organs in the ventral body cavities. And many of the endocrine glands of the body are all epithelial glandular tissues. So how do you recognize an epithelium? And this is going to be important as we look at all of the tissues under the microscopes. And one characteristic that we associate with all epithelia is that they have an apical surface. That's the most superficial layer of the organ or the body structure in question, where the cells end and there are no more cells attached there. So if this is a slice through the lining of the digestive system, so this is a slice through the lining of the pharynx and down into the esophagus. A hollow tube And so we're looking at a little piece sliced right out of here. There we are. This is the apical surface, also known as the free surface. So the free surface, or the apical surface, is here, and it faces into the hollow of the trachea, not trachea, of the esophagus. There we are. Sorry about that. We talk about that hollow space as the lumen, by the way. So it lines and faces toward the lumen of the esophagus. And so these surfaces, they can be smooth and slick, or they might have structures that we've talked about already, the microvilli. These are the non-moving extensions that are there to increase the surface area of a cell. Sometimes this apical surface, or free surface, may have cilia. These are the hair-like extensions that wave and move fluids past the free surface. So some examples of apical surfaces would be the surface of the skin, or the inside layer of cells of the stomach wall that are facing the lumen of the stomach. So apical surface or free surface, both those, you'll hear me use both those terms to describe this upper layer. Okay, so all epithelia have an apical surface. And so when you're looking at cells under the microscope and trying to determine what tissue this is, one thing that you can always count on is that you'll be able to find an apical surface associated with that epithelium. Okay, so if there is a free surface here at the top, or at the most superficial portion of the structure, then there's also a basement membrane, or a basal surface and layer. And that basement membrane is down here at the bottom of the epithelium. So these are epithelial cells from here all the way down to this darkened layer. So there is the basement, or the base layer, the basal surface. And the basal cell surface, the deep surface of the epithelium, is going to be supported by what's referred to as a basement membrane. And this basement membrane is the connector between the epithelial cells and the underlying connective tissue, because always we'll see a connective tissue deep to a epithelium, because epithelial cells are not necessarily good at binding themselves to whatever material is below. So there's a layer of protein fibers that underlies the epithelial surface, basal layer, and helps to provide support and strengthens that basal layer. And it's this non-living mesh of protein fibers that are extracellular, and they are produced by that connective tissue, and also the epithelia above have some role in producing this basement membrane. When you look at it, the protein fibers are just laid every which way like this, so they are interlaced with each other, and that provides strength so that you can tug it in all directions. So if you tug against it, there's always going to be some fibers that are providing support. So these fibers are supporting as we tug top to bottom. These fibers are supporting as left to right. So if we pull these directions, then we have these fibers here that are supporting that without allowing the epithelial cells to rip apart from each other. So the epithelial basal layer is attached to this basement membrane. Epithelial cells tend to fit together very tightly, forming an uninterrupted layer of cells. So now, rather than looking in side view, in this picture, we're looking at side view at a bunch of cells. So these are slices through the cells so that we can see them from the side. In this picture now we're looking straight down onto an epithelium, and you can see that the epithelial cells are wedged very tightly against each other. Their membranes come very close to each other, and the cells are attached to each other by tight junctions and by desmosomes. So this gives the cells a lot of a lot of surface attachment to each other. It makes them relatively waterproof. So epithelial cells, they're held together tightly enough that we don't lose lots of water from the tissues that are beneath. And there's very little extracellular fluid. So remember, cat's tail is on the... All right, cat, you're out of here. The ECF stands for extracellular fluid. That's the fluid that's outside the cell that bathes the cell, that keeps the cell surface moist. But there's very little extracellular fluid in epithelial cells because they're held so darn tightly together. So that prevents them from being pulled apart and prevents stuff from leaking around. And it's the reason why when we get really badly sunburned, we can peel cells off. That's in layers or in sheets. You're tugging at a cell layer, and it just comes peeling away because they're held so tightly together. And there are lots of nerve cells or nerve fibers that are associated with epithelia that send information up to the brain about what we're noticing in the environment around us, and receive information from the brain about doing things like, oh, it's time to sweat, or whatever needs to happen. Epithelia are avascular. A meaning without, vascular meaning vessel. So there are no blood vessels found in the epithelial layer tissues. So that means that it's only the cells that are down there at the basal layer that have direct access to oxygen from the underlying connective tissue. Connective tissues tend to be very vascular. And so that means that the cells, if there are in multiple layers, so here's some cells that are all layered up, here's the basement membrane, and down here we have blood vessels passing by. It's only this basal layer, the one that's attached to the basement membrane, that has direct access to blood supply. And so these basal cells have to pass oxygen and nutrients up to the cells above if they're going to continue to live. And of course, on the opposite, if this one makes waste materials like carbon dioxide or some other waste, we'd have to diffuse it downward to get it back into the blood to be carried off to the heart again. And last, or not last, but another characteristic of epithelia is that these basal cells are stem cells. And these epithelial stem cells divide rapidly. And this allows epithelia to rapidly regenerate and repair. And you've experienced this. Anytime you've had damage to your skin, it doesn't take but about a week and a half, and the skin is repaired because stem cells down there at the basal layer can divide and divide and divide and produce new skin surfaces. So the functions that we associate them with an epithelium is protection, resistance to abrasion, resistance to chemical damage, resistance to microbes being able to get around those cells and enter the body. And the skin prevents water loss, especially. So that's how we do sweat at the skin, but that's in order to cool the body down. We also prevent a lot of water loss there at the skin. Secretion, the production of some sort of glandular product, so oils, sweat, digestive fluids like acids and enzymes, hormones, all of those are secretions that come from glandular epithelium. Absorption, so say the lining of the digestive tract is got a very important absorption function, and so these epithelia are able to take in nutrients and other materials and deliver them to the underlying tissues. Excretion, so we'll see epithelia that are involved in removing wastes from underlying tissues. And then finally, filtration. We can trap materials to either remove them from the body or prevent them from escaping from body fluids. So all of these are functions that epithelia are involved in. So there you have it. The ways, characteristics of tissues, the ways that the cells and tissues are held together, and then some characteristics specifically of epithelia. And so in our next lecture, we're going to continue by talking about how we classify epithelial tissues and then some of the different epithelia types. So we'll continue with that very soon.